Hello, this is Patrice, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the July 21st issue of the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Faced with piles of new paperwork, people are losing food stamps. Arizona's Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as SNAP, rolls have plummeted, offering a possible preview of national trends as states try to avoid new federal penalties. This is an article by Jason DeParle. The number of Arizonans getting SNAP benefits has fallen by about half in less than a year, a remarkable drop in nutrition aid that may preview the program's future nationwide following a landmark law to limit assistance that President Trump championed last year. Many of the 440,000 Arizonans dropped from the Supplemental Nutrition Program, food stamps, remain eligible for help, but the new law establishes steep penalties on states that make too many mistakes when awarding benefits. To avoid those costs, which are so large that state officials say they could end the program, Arizona increased the paperwork that applicants must file, even as it cut the staff to review it. The result, aid seekers and officials both say, has been bureaucratic chaos. It can take months to reach besieged caseworkers, and if offices have gone as far as asking people with panhandling income for verification from strangers dropping cash in their drop jar. Arizonans losing SNAP say they are skipping meals, quarreling over food, and missing rent payments to restock pantry shelves. For the first time, monthly visits to states' food banks, private charities have exceeded enrollment in SNAP, the government's main nutrition safety net. Arizona took especially quick and aggressive steps to combat errors, and its caseload declines may prove much larger than those elsewhere. But with the other states facing the same penalties, Arizona's experience as an early test case is being scrutinized for clues to future trends. Among Arizonans who lost SNAP is Dee McDonald, who is raising three grandsons in a trim cottage in Mesa with a list of family rules that include be thankful. Last October, Ms. McDonald, 65, tried to renew a $700 monthly SNAP benefit that supplements Social Security and provides a third of her income. In November, no aid arrived. In December, a caseworker said to hang in there because renewals were a month behind. In January, Ms. McDonald made 100 calls without reaching anyone, she said. In February, she discovered her case had been closed. She had submitted the wrong income statement, she later learned, and the state's delays left her no time to fix it. 4 months into an appeal, Ms. McDonald, a cancer survivor who weighs 69 pounds, bustles to food banks, stretches ground turkey with oatmeal, and skips meals to feed three teenage boys. But her grocery bills have left her behind on the rent, and she describes her worries as a mental tax paid nightly on her pillow. I go to sleep thinking about what we are going to have, she says. I'm exhausted. Officials in Arizona, which has a Democratic governor, Katie Hobbs, acknowledge they have created large barriers to aid, but they blame last year's law, which congressional Republicans passed on a party line vote for forcing states' hands. Alarmed at the caseload decline, Arizona rehired some staff and relaxed some paperwork demands, and the rolls grew modestly in May and June. Still, Michael Weishart, who runs the Arizona Department of Economic Security, which administers SNAP, said, "It's frankly sickening to me the number of individuals that continue to struggle with the added bureaucracy. The penalties that the federal law can impose are so large," he said, up to $300 million in Arizona, that states that incur them could be forced to eliminate SNAP altogether. It's an existential threat, he said. States are absolutely contemplating a world in which SNAP isn't available. Washington's war on errors. The Republicans who passed last year's law saw SNAP as a bloated program and cuts as a way to help finance the tax reductions, mostly for the wealthy, central to Mr. Trump's agenda. SNAP caseloads had more than doubled since the early 2000s, with about 1 American in 8 receiving help, and the Biden administration unilaterally raised benefits by 25%. Annual costs exceed $100 billion. While states or counties run the program and contribute to administrative costs, benefits historically have been paid by the federal government. Critics said the state's insulation from the program's cost encouraged lax oversight and fueled caseload growth. Some pointed to the rise in error rates, which measures mistakes in the size of benefits paid. Error rates nationally have exceeded 10% in recent years, with more than 9% coming from overpayments and 1% representing underpayments. That is about 3 times the rate a decade earlier. Some critics also argue that significant numbers of SNAP recipients commit fraud to get aid, but error rates mostly captured unintentional mistakes, often by caseworkers, in complex tallies of income and expenses as detected in the audits. Last year's law, the One Big Beautiful Bill, made the deepest cuts in SNAP history. It expanded work rules, cut in half the federal share of administrative expenses, which could lead other states to cut caseworkers, as Arizona has, and required states with high error rates to pay up to 15% of benefit costs. In talking to a reporter, Ms. McDonald said she was puzzled by his reference to an obscure phrase of error rate. Error rate, she said, I've never heard anyone speak of it. Then the events of recent months made sense. Told a high error rate could cost the state hundreds of millions of dollars, Ms. McDonald wore a look of sudden understanding. It's the pressure from the administration not to make a mistake, she said. We're feeling it, she added. Everything is just 10 times more difficult. I have abbreviated this article as it's very lengthy. If you'd like to hear the whole article, the number to call 716-821-5555. Ukraine battlefield momentum helped spur interest in post-war investment. At a conference on reconstruction, the focus shifted to private investment, not donor assistance. This is an article by Andrew E. Kramer. The mood has shifted on the war in Ukraine. Just ask the businessmen who skipped cocktails and toasted deals one recent evening at a party outside a hip dockside cafe. The party followed a conference in Gdansk, Poland, on the post-war reconstruction of Ukraine. Previous gatherings revolved around donor assistance. This year, the emphasis was private investment, a view of Ukraine not as a battered victim, but as a large post-war market on a path to European Union membership. The change was a sign of more upbeat assessment among diplomats, military analysts, and businessmen of Kyiv's prospects in the war. The front line is still a crucible of drone-fueled violence, and Russian missiles continue to streak into Ukrainian cities. But Russia's advances have been mostly halted, and Ukraine is hitting back regularly, including with strikes on Moscow. The overarching pitch at the conference was to put money into Ukraine even as it remains at war. Any such investment is a wager that Ukraine will deny Russia its broad ambitions in the conflict and remain an independent state. Among the 7,500 attendees was Jeremy Lewin, the State Department's Undersecretary for Foreign Assistance and Humanitarian Affairs. In a speech, he said this was the moment to invest in the dip in Ukraine, to buy now when prices are lower and profit as the country rises. The conference produced 160 agreements that netted Ukraine about $11 billion in private investment and aid, according to Leah Serdenko, who until last week was Ukraine's prime minister. The Export-Import Bank of the United States announced an up to $300 million line of credit for Naftogaz, Ukraine's state oil and gas company, to buy American construction equipment and oil industry services. For now, Ukraine's economy is propped up by international aid, but the country's long-term prospects are potentially lucrative. Ukraine holds one of Europe's largest known reserves of natural gas, with an estimated value of about $300 billion. People are looking at serious business opportunities in Ukraine, said Duncan Nightingale, the chairman of the board of Naftogaz. The forum buzzed with a very high level of optimism, he said. Ukraine still faces battlefield challenges, including a slow but steady Russian advance in the Donbas region in the east, and there is little indication that President Vladimir V. Putin of Russia plans to stop fighting anytime soon. Overnight Sunday, Russia fired at least 41 missiles, mostly aimed at Kyiv, Ukraine's Air Force said. And on the Ukrainian side, the dim of a popular defense minister has shaken confidence in the country's so far successful drone war strategies. Still, some analysts say the war has turned in Ukraine's favor, a shift more marked than any since the conflict's first months, when Russia endured a series of defeats. Ukraine is fielding a new class of video-guided mid-range drones that reach across the Russian-held land corridor connecting occupied Crimea to Russia. Kyiv is routinely striking both supply lines into Crimea and oil refineries deep inside Russia, trying to increase pressure on Moscow to negotiate a settlement. President Trump, long a skeptic of Ukraine's chances against Russia, has taken note. He's doing pretty well, Mr. Trump said last month of President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine. A willingness to put money into the country is a sign of the shifting. Still, new direct foreign investment has been limited. Companies that operated in Ukraine before the invasion, including McDonald's and Nestle, have expanded as it became clear that Russia would not overrun the country. But companies not already present have mostly held back, said Andy Hunter, the head of the American Chamber of Commerce in Ukraine. At the party, businessmen and diplomats nursed Aperol spritzes in the ethereal twilight of midsummer on the Baltic Sea. The choice of venue was telling. It was at this port where the liberation of Central and Eastern Europe from the Soviet Union began with the solidarity movement of dock workers organized by Lech Walesa in the 1980s. Now, the former Lenin shipyard is a gentrifying zone of condominiums, art galleries, and coffee shops. The gritty docks have been transformed through Poland's post communist economic boom, a path Ukrainian officials say they hope to emulate after the war. Again, I edited that article a little bit. GOP boxed in on Iran war as Trump sidelines Congress. Republicans now face a worst case political scenario of being asked to fund an unpopular war over which they have exercised little oversight. This article is by Robert Jimison. President Trump has yet again circumvented the legislative branch as he orders American forces back into combat in the Middle East, weeks after both chambers of Congress rebuked him for waging war in Iran without authorization. The collapse of the ceasefire and resumption of hostilities has inflamed a debate on Capitol Hill over war powers, just as the administration is seeking tens of billions of dollars to pay for the conflict. That has presented Republicans with a political worst case scenario months before midterm elections in which their majorities are at stake. They're being asked to vote to fund an unpopular war over which they have had no meaningful oversight and which they have never voted to approve. The greatest fighting force on the planet, the last great superpower, must be fully equipped, and that's the job of Congress to make sure it's done, Speaker Mike Johnson told CNN's Manu Raju last week at the Capitol. The administration last month requested $87.6 billion in supplemental funding that would include $67.1 billion in extra military spending this year. Asked whether it wasn't also the job of Congress to authorize the war, Mr. Johnson replied, "We're going to supply the needs for America's national security." The position amounts to the latest instance of Republicans ceding power to the executive branch as they sidestep a debate over the conduct of the war and try to rally support within their ranks for a filibuster-proof party line bill to pay for it with no strings attached. It is all the more remarkable coming weeks after bipartisan majorities in both House and Senate voted to reassert Congress's constitutional role over matters of war, a slap on Mr. Trump's wrist 4 months into a conflict that he said would last a matter of weeks. Democrats who worked for months to rally support for such a reproach have followed it up by refusing to allow consideration of the annual defense policy bill or back legislation to fund the military. They've argued that Congress cannot separate its power of the purse from its constitutional authority over war, demanding that the administration share more information about its strategy and a plan for the war before they consider voting to bankroll it. If the Republicans won our votes, they should provide a credible strategy, Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, and the minority leader said in an interview last week. How long it lasts, where does it end, and what our goals are. Very simple. They haven't. Even Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island, the top Democrat on the Armed Services Committee, voted with his party to block the defense policy measure, which he had supported in committee over objections to the handling of the conflict with Iran. I cannot vote to proceed to a bill that enables an ongoing war against Iran that Congress never authorized, Mr. Reed said. Republicans, by contrast, have largely sidestepped the renewed war powers debate, many of them echoing Mr. Trump's justifications for resuming the fight. The fact of the matter is, President Trump is the first president dealing with what has been the status quo for decades, which is Iran attacking everybody's ships, everybody's navy, anything going through the Strait of Hormuz, Representative Brian Mast, the Florida Republican who chairs the Foreign Relations Committee, said on Friday during an interview on Fox News. After this escalation from them, we are now the United States of America that says this is not going to be the status quo. It's going. Sunday evening marked the ninth consecutive night that the United States and Iran traded another wave of strikes. U.S. Central Command said in a statement that American forces were holding Iran accountable at the commander in chief's direction. At least 3 U.S. soldiers, were killed over the weekend. 2 in Jordan when an Iranian ballistic missile struck a military base, and another during the disposal of an Iranian drone in northern Iraq. The number of American military personnel killed since the war began at the end of February is now up to 17. On Monday afternoon, Mr. Trump vowed to avenge the deaths of the soldiers, saying in a social media post that every time Iran kills an American soldier, they will pay for that killing many times over. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. This life-saving genetics tool works best if you're white. Genetic prediction models are poised to revolutionize medicine, but because they have been trained on European DNA, they threaten to widen healthcare disparities. This is an article by Emily Baumgartner-Nunn. The National Institutes of Health recently announced a remarkable achievement: the world's largest database of human genomes, a repository of information that the agency says will help usher in a new era in personalized medicine. Scientists are already developing clinical tools and techniques based on genomic information gathered from the agency's All of Us program, one of the most promising polygenic risk scores. These can help predict a person's likelihood of developing complex diseases like cardiovascular disease and breast cancer from as early as infancy. But there's a glaring problem. The tools were trained overwhelmingly on the DNA of people of European descent, so they often fail to accurately assess risks for anyone else. For some conditions, the forecasts for people of color are almost no better than flipping a coin. Researchers are racing to correct the biases through advancements in modeling and widespread recruitment of minority groups. They fear that failing to close the gaps could worsen healthcare disparities and prevent the technology from realizing its promise of helping to decrease chronic disease. It really warrants attention, said Emer Kenny, the director of the Institute of Genomic Health at Mount Sinai and a principal investigator in a national consortium that tests the genetic scores. Geneticists measure a polygenic risk score by aggregating hundreds or thousands of tiny variations across the genome, many of which might nudge a person's disease risk by only a fraction. By bundling them together, they can generate a cumulative score, ranking a person's predisposition to common killers. For patients at the extremely high end of the risk distribution, the scores can offer a medical advantage, potentially giving doctors a decades-long runway to intervene. Those in the highest percentiles for a cardiovascular disease score, for instance, can be prescribed a cholesterol-lowering statins earlier, potentially helping prevent some heart attacks and strokes. But the entire premise rests on the data used to train the model in the first place. The UK Biobank, established in the early 2000s and widely considered a leading genomic trove, is overwhelmingly homogeneous. Roughly 94% of its participants are white. The Million Veteran Program, a repository by the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, is almost 3/4 white. The cohort in the All of Us program, built by the NIH, National Institute of Health, with the goal of diversifying data, is still about 50% European, according to Alicia Martin, a statistical geneticist at the Broad Institute. The effort's future is also at risk. One of its major funding streams, the 21st Century Cures Act, is set to expire at the end of this fiscal year. The program's budget has already been reduced by 72% since 2003. You just can't snap your fingers and overnight have a biobank from Africa, a biobank from India, a biobank from China that are all as large and open and comprehensive as the UK Biobank, Dr. Martin said. We can develop all the fancy statistical methods we want, but still not be able to overcome without more diverse representation. Other clinical tools could be affected by the ancestry bias, such as integrated artificial intelligence models that draw upon genomics and other biomedical data. Doctors who sequence a genome to look for rare mutations may also find genetic variants in patients of color that researchers have not studied enough to understand. Academic networks have also tapped sources beyond biobanks, integrating data from large disease specific cohort projects, including the atherosclerosis risk in community studies, or ARIC, which intentionally enrolled thousands of Black participants from North Carolina and Mississippi. For breast cancer, a project called Confluence aggregates data from over 300 individual studies across 62 countries, providing information from 400,000 breast cancer cases and more than 1.5 million controls. The influx of data from minority groups is being used to sharpen breast cancer polygenic risk scores for everyone. Private genomics companies and startups looking to develop and sell polygenic risk scores do not typically have access to these vast networks. Until recently, they relied almost exclusively on data from the UK Biobank, but the All of Us program recently expanded its policies so that companies can use its more diverse data. Will all of these efforts taken together be enough? It depends on whom you ask. Some experts argue that even an ethnically representative data pool is still imperfect since variations in other factors, socioeconomic status, health access, age, or even sex, can still cause a score's accuracy to decay. Others believe that the statistical issue was overblown in the first place. Dr. Kenny, who has been helping to test existing polygenic risk scores for 11 common conditions in racially and ethnically diverse patients, argues that the bias is too complex to resolve quickly. I don't think these things are perfectly portable yet, and maybe never will be perfectly portable, she said, but there are things that are starting to narrow the gap. Burnham's day one as Prime Minister, a homeless shelter, a palace, and Downing Street. As Andy Burnham became Britain's seventh leader in a decade on Monday, he tried to show that he will govern differently. This is an article by Stephen Castle, Michael D. Shear, and Megan Specia. Andy Burnham's day began with a visit to a homeless shelter in central London where he chopped mushrooms and chatted with other helpers preparing breakfast. A few hours later, by now wearing a suit and tie, he shook hands with King Charles III in the gilded splendor of Buckingham Palace. Accepting the monarch's request to form a government, Mr. Burnham, who was named leader of the governing Labour Party on Friday, became Britain's seventh prime minister after a decade of extraordinary turbulence. Mr. Burnham's early morning trip to the homeless charity seemed designed to send a signal to the country about his priorities and to underscore his pledge to tackle social issues and reshape British politics. On a day of ritual ceremony, Mr. Burnham pledged in a short speech outside 10 Downing Street to put the care of people at the heart of everything I do. He described his move into Britain's top job as a circuit breaker moment to change the direction taken by a succession of neoliberal governments over the past 4 decades that favored privatization and deindustrialized the country. I know people at home are fed up with politics, he told the public, speaking without notes and minus the lectern that prime ministers usually speak from outside Downing Street. I hear you, and I want to be honest with you. We have not been good enough, and we need to be better. We will be. The speed of Mr. Burnham's ascent to the top job in British politics is striking. Earlier this year, his path to Downing Street seemed blocked when he was prevented from running for a parliamentary seat that he needed to challenge Prime Minister Keir Starmer. But after a disastrous set of elections in Scotland, Wales, and English municipalities in May, Mr. Starmer had to relent and allow Mr. Burnham to run in a special election, which he won emphatically. That put him in pole position to succeed Mr. Starmer, whose popularity had sunk to some of the lowest levels recorded for a British Prime Minister just 2 years after winning a general election in 2024. Supporters hope Mr. Burnham will revive his party's fortunes after more than a year during which the populist right-wing party, Reform UK, has led opinion polls, albeit with about 25% of voter support. Mr. Burnham's rise follows a period of political turmoil that began with the Brexit vote in 2016, when voters severed ties to the European Union. In his speech, Mr. Burnham, the first lifelong Roman Catholic to become Britain's prime minister, said he would move quickly to announce measures to ease the burden on voters frustrated with stagnating living standards and impatient for change. Promising to give people some breathing space now, he said he would explain how such measures would be financed in the coming days. He also said that later this year he would propose a 10-year plan for the country. Earlier in the day, Mr. Starmer, made his final appearance as Prime Minister. My work is done, he declared in a brief farewell speech, saying that he left with good grace and a smile. By Monday evening, many of Mr. Starmer's closest allies had been ousted from the government as Mr. Burnham began forming his cabinet. In a surprise appointment, John Healey, a former defense secretary, was given the critical job of Chancellor of the Exchequer, overseeing the nation's finances, replacing Rachel Reeves, who left the cabinet. A political veteran, Mr. Healey regarded as a safe pair of hands, and he was a junior minister in the Treasury in Prime Minister Tony Blair's government. Mr. Healey resigned as Defense Secretary in June, arguing that a proposed increase in British military spending was insufficient, a move that destabilized Mr. Starmer's leadership. In his new job, Mr. Healey will now have to find the money needed to upgrade Britain's armed forces, but his appointment may reassure some of those in the financial markets who were worried by speculation that the job might go to Ed Miliband, who is seen as being more to the left of the Labour Party than Ms. Reeves. Mr. Miliband, a former Labour leader, was named Foreign Secretary, while Shabana Mahmood kept her job as Home Secretary, a signal that Mr. Burnham is largely backing her efforts to crack down on legal and illegal migration. David Lammy, who was the Deputy Prime Minister under Mr. Starmer, announced that he would be leaving government. Mr. Burnham also expected to shift some aspects of Mr. Starmer's agenda on energy. Lucy Powell, Labour's deputy leader and a close Burnham ally, said on Sunday that he would take a more pragmatic approach to North Sea gas and oil than Mr. Starmer, but added, I don't think it is a change of policy, more a change of emphasis. In a post on Truth Social on Sunday, President Trump appeared to welcome, if exaggerate, the expected change in energy policy. People in the Scottish port city of Aberdeen, he claimed, were dancing in the streets because the new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, has stated that he will be opening up all the way the invaluable North Sea oil. Mr. Burnham spoke to Mr. Trump shortly after he became Prime Minister, Downing said. According to a readout of the call, he congratulated the president on a successful run as the co-host of the World Cup. Mr. Burnham, who was the mayor of Greater Manchester for the past 9 years, invited Mr. Trump to the city for a visit. In his speech, Mr. Burnham immediately announced one concrete new policy, saying he would end rough sleeping, a British term for homelessness. It is an ambitious, and some have argued impossible, goal, but one that is close to his heart. He donated 15% of his annual salary to homelessness charities during his 9 years as mayor of Greater Manchester. Mr. Burnham pledged to end homelessness when he was mayor, too. The number of rough sleepers did drop significantly in his city by 2020, but a report earlier this year in The Mill, a Manchester newspaper, found that it had increased steadily over the past 4 years. At the homeless shelter on Monday morning, Mr. Burnham addressed that. We ran a scheme every night, 600 beds called a bed every night, he recounted. And we funded it through various different ways, but we were the only place that was doing it, and you won't be able to get the numbers down if you're the only place. Other homeless people he said, came to Manchester because of the support that was available. So it taught me the only way is to do this together, Mr. Burnham said. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. To win their races, Black politicians confront a new landscape. With the Voting Rights Act weakened, Black representation will depend less on Black voters and more on broad, multiracial appeal or on ideological outsider campaigns. This article is by Bernard Mockham and Clyde McGrady. As majority Black districts are blown up one by one, the future of Black representation in Congress could look something like Yorkville, Illinois, where Representative Lauren Underwood joined the town parade on the 4th of July. The Congresswoman and her parents were among the few black people in a sea of white faces along the mile-long route. Or it could look like the majority white House district in and around Denver, where Malat Kiros, an Ethiopian-born 29-year-old, made far more of her socialist ideologically than her ideology, than her race, to defeat the white incumbent Diana Maggette in last month's Democratic primary. Black representation in government will depend less and less on Black voters in the wake of the Supreme Court decision that rendered many intentionally drawn majority Black districts unconstitutional. Instead, Black politicians will have to win more votes from people who do not look like them, whether by appealing broadly to a multiracial, multi-ethnic electorate or ideologically to just enough like minded voters to give them a majority. The idea that Black candidates are only electable in Black districts is patently false, said Ms. Underwood, who is running for a fifth term after flipping a seat in 2018 that stretches from Chicago's suburbs to Illinois' corn and soybean fields. After the Supreme Court weakened the Voting Rights Act in April, Republican states in the South moved quickly to dilute Black voting blocs, arguing that dispersing concentrations of reliably Democratic voters wasn't racially motivated, but a purely partisan quest for more Republican House seats. Alabama, Louisiana, and Tennessee eliminated majority Black districts first, but similar efforts loom ahead of the 2020 ahead in 2028 in several other cities. In blue states such as Illinois and New York, Democratic leaders are likely to scatter highly concentrated Black voters into more suburban districts, trading Black urban seats won now by huge margins to more competitive districts that weaken Black voting power as they maximize Democratic seats. Fears about dwindling representation hinge on the idea that Black candidates need Black voters to win office, but the data contradicts that. Already, about half of the more than 60 elected Black members of Congress represent multiracial, multi-ethnic constituencies in which Black voters are not a majority. The reason we don't need racial gerrymandering in the United States of America is because you're seeing Black candidates get elected in a lot of different places, said Representative Byron Ronalds, a Republican now running to be the first Black governor of Florida. And that's not a party question, that's just a values question. Charles Bullock III, a political science professor at the University of Georgia, recalled a black tax that used to cost Black candidates a certain percentage of votes on race alone. No more. In the twin Georgia Senate races of 2020, the Reverend Raphael Warnock, a Black Democrat, won his seat by a wider margin than his fellow Democrat, Jon Ossoff, who is white. In interviews, Black candidates and elected officials said they appealed to voters through a host of cultural and values based issues, from faith and family to healthcare and cost of living. They also said they connected on ideological lines, running as outsiders compelled to upset the status quo. Every district is unique, and we want to make sure we are in tune with the needs of the district, said Representative Marilyn Strickland, a Democrat from Tacoma, Washington. My district is urban, rural, suburban. It has one of the largest military installations in the entire country. Ms. Strickland champions issues that help her relate her racial identity and to the broader concerns of her constituents. Her Black father met her Korean mother as a U.S. Army soldier stationed in Korea, and pushing veteran services has allowed Ms. Strickland to combine her background with a politically popular position. The most successful Black candidates are people who are somehow able to walk that line to demonstrate somehow that they're universalistic, said Elijah Anderson, a sociologist at Yale University who studies how Black people navigate white space. You're finding candidates who understand how to tap into the phenomenon of outside versus insider politics, said Lee Wright Rigueur, a political historian at Johns Hopkins University. In Detroit, Donovan McKinney is running as both an anti-establishment candidate and a racially conscious one in a district where Black people hold a small majority but are represented now by a progressive Indian American, Sri Thanador. He's not like us, Mr. McKinney says of the incumbent in campaign ads, even as he courts left-wing voters through his association with the progressive insurgency group Justice Democrats. Some Black politicians say that running as a Black candidate in a multiracial district does come with a higher hurdle to clear electability. In 2018, Johanna Hayes was not the Democratic establishment's preferred primary candidate when she ran in a Connecticut House district that was less than 10% Black. Ms. Hayes said she had worked twice as hard and leaned on her background as a school teacher who was once a teenage mother and had experienced homelessness. I went into communities that never really voted for a Democrat, let alone a Black woman, and talked about the future I imagined for my children, she said, and just about everywhere, from the suburbs to the cities to the most affluent or the lowest income places, most people have a similar idea of what it is that they want. She trounced both her primary and general election opponents, both white. If I had listened to them, she said, I wouldn't be here 4 cycles later. Judges ask Congress for power to fix crumbling courthouses, undrinkable water, leaks, mold. Federal courthouses need billions of dollars in repair. And judges say the General Services Administration is a bad landlord. This article is by Mathathias Schwartz. For years, the chief judge overseeing the federal courts in Chicago had been trying to fix the water inside the Everett McKinney Dirksen U.S. Courthouse. A study had found that the water flowing to the building's showers, sinks, and drinking fountains most likely contained elevated levels of Legionella, the bacteria that causes Legionnaire's disease. But in an interview, Chief Judge Virginia M. Kendall said the General Services Administration, which manages hundreds of federal courthouses around the country on behalf of the executive branch, rejected multiple requests over months to install a disinfection system that would clean the water. That step had been recommended by a water treatment expert hired by the court who found in a 2024 report that colonies of Legionella had most likely established themselves in the pipes of the 62-year-old courthouse. The water is just one of many issues in our building, Judge Kendall said. We cannot do our jobs with this level of disruption, chaos, and delay. Judges across the country have been complaining that their courthouses are in dire state of disrepair and that the GSA is not doing enough to respond. The extent of the problem was highlighted in interviews with chief judges of district courts, as well as a list of maintenance issues compiled by the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts, which coordinates operations across the judiciary. A judge in Oklahoma worked beside a trash bin to catch water falling from a leaking ceiling before the problem became so severe that she was forced to move to temporary chambers for more than a year. A century-old courthouse in Asheville, North Carolina is plagued by mold and a dilapidated heating system requiring some court services to move off-site. Judges from other courthouses say the GSA has been slow to address problems with the critical HVAC systems, falling ceiling tiles, and termites. In the Middle District of Florida, the GSA has been slow to respond to repeated leaks in Jacksonville and has taken more than 2 years to fully repair a fence that secures a parking lot for judges in Ocala. Chief Judge Marcia Morales Howard said in an interview. She criticized the agency for failing to take into account the impact of courthouse shutdowns on jurors, litigants, and the rule of law. GSA gets paid their rent no matter what, she said, and we can't move, so there's just no urgency in getting repairs done. In an interview, Janet E. Stout, an expert on water quality who helps set industry-wide Legionella standards for engineers and who has done work for the GSA, defended the agency's approach to testing and remediation. Ms. Stout said that the GSA goes above and beyond the safety standards of other organizations and that its conservative approach to signage and turning off water can sometimes elevate anxiety levels of its building tenants. Judge Kendall went back to the GSA and told the agency she could not stand by and see a colleague almost die because you haven't put in a disinfection machine, she said in an interview. The agency was already trying to reduce bacteria by installing filtered shower heads and flushing water through the building's pipes, but in her view, that was not sufficient. In mid-June, Judge Kendall said the GSA finally agreed to install the disinfection system at Dirksen, but as of mid-July, the project was not yet complete. Jurors and courthouse workers currently drink from water coolers, the costs for which are divided between the court and the agency. This is not the first time the Chicago courthouse has had problems with the GSA stewardship. In 2024, court officials complained about sewage seeping down into workspaces after a renovation to cell blocks for criminal defendants on the building's 24th floor. The project took 5.5 years and it was eventually completed at a cost of more than $21.3 million. And now on to a little bit of sports news. Spain celebrates both a soccer win and a sense of wider success. For many fans, the World Cup victory cemented a belief that something promising, a cultural, economic, and sports revival, is happening in the country. This article is by Jason Horowitz. After Spain won the Soccer World Cup, Lucia Sanchez joined a boisterous river of fans clad in red and yellow jerseys early on Monday in Madrid and took stock of the special time her country was enjoying. "We're in a good moment," Ms. Sanchez, 22, said outside Madrid's packed Plaza de Colón as the nearby crowd sang, "I am Spanish, Spanish, Spanish." So many facets of life seem to be going Spain's way, and other countries realize that, she said. It all goes together. By winning the World Championship only 3 years after their female counterparts did the same, Spain's men's soccer team have bolstered the sense that, amid a broader cultural, economic, and sports renaissance, something promising is happening in Spain, and that to be here now is to be in the right place at the right time. Spain has a housing crisis, and its government is embattled by corruption scandals, dampening any unqualified triumphalism. Still, its strong economy is the envy of much of Europe, and last year it accounted for more than 40% of the jobs created in the European Union. It is far ahead of much of the West in converting to renewable energy, attracting investors seeking to build data centers and other industries hoping to feed off its cheaper electricity. In the cultural sphere, Spain is also firing on all cylinders. Spanish cinema has entered a new and more diverse era, spurring high praise abroad. Javier Ambrosi and Javier Calvo, the former couple known simply as Los Javes, won Best Director honors in Cannes this year and received a 20-minute standing ovation, the second longest in the festival's history. Rosalia, a Barcelonian chanteuse, is helping to drive a shift away from English language songs on Spotify, the music streaming platform. Foreigners are visiting Spain in ever larger numbers. The government expects a record 100 million tourists this year, and the capital city, Madrid, is booming with new restaurants, exhibits, expats, and energy. One recent visitor was Pope Leo, who spent a feel good week in Spain in June and congratulated the Madrid church on scoring a spectacular goal as his appearances drew huge crowds. That ended a long period in which the country had received no papal visits and set off hopes among Spanish Catholics of a spiritual revival. As other countries turn their backs on immigrants, Spain is also drawing attention and praise from liberals because of its government's efforts to encourage immigration, though not everyone in Spain sees that as a positive. Some soccer crowds have joined in anti Muslim chads. A former prime minister said France's diverse team did not have any French players, but diversity, embraced by some Spaniards, even if scorned by the far right, is increasingly reflected in the national men's soccer team. After Spain won, its star player, the 19-year-old Lamine Yamal, a Muslim born to parents from Morocco and Equatorial Guinea, made an Islamic prostration on the field while the defeated Argentine players scuffled with his teammates behind him. Nico Williams, who delivered the game-winning assist and who is also the child of African immigrants, celebrated by giving his gold medal to his Guianan-born mother, who crossed the Sahara to reach Spain. Politically, too, Spain is a standout. Though at home, Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's inner circle is embroiled in graft accusations, he has emerged as a global liberal darling for positioning the country as a left-wing island amid the right-wing. He has stood up to President Trump over the war in Iran, as well as taking a different stance on migration and other issues. His government was an early and vocal supporter of Palestinian statehood and has long described Israel's war in Gaza as genocide, an accusation Israel rejects. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel said before the game that he was supporting Argentina. "It is the happiest day of my life," said Mark Saez, 18, who watched with friends in Valencia before diving back into the crowd to celebrate. Others there saw the victory as proof of how far the country had come. We're just the best country in the world, said Vincent Salivert, 19. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Pentagon withheld dozens of U.S. military injuries in Iran war. On social media, the Pentagon said later on Monday that the number of U.S. military casualties from Iranian attacks since July 7 had risen to nearly 100. This article is by Eric Schmidt. In the week leading up to the Iranian attack on Friday that killed 2 U.S. soldiers and left 1 service member missing in Jordan, Iran carried out 3 other strikes against U.S. forces in the country. Those attacks injured dozens of U.S. service members and damaged several helicopters, according to several U.S. officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss operational matters. The Pentagon did not disclose the earlier strikes nor the casualties and damage they inflicted. Yet later on Monday on social media, its chief spokesman said that the number of U.S. military casualties from Iranian attacks since July had risen to nearly 100. The episode from this weekend is the latest example during the Iran conflict of the tension between what the Pentagon says is the need for operational security and the government's obligation to inform the public about the conduct of the war. In statements after airstrikes against Iranian military sites last week, U.S. Central Command said it was retaliating for Iran's attacks against the commercial ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz, never mentioning Iran's strikes on bases in the region, including in Jordan. Central Command is not required to release information about injured service members, especially when they quickly return to duty, a U.S. military official said. Moreover, another U.S. military official added, Why would the Pentagon divulge information that could help Iran zero in on its deadly ballistic missiles and drone attacks in Jordan and other bases in the Middle East, where thousands of American troops were stationed? Central Command has also stopped announcing how many sites in Iran it hits each day for the same reason, U.S. officials say. Sean Parnell, the chief Pentagon spokesman, said that the military had not withheld or misrepresented U.S. casualties in the war. Claims of concealment are fabrications meant to further distress the American people in the wake of 3 service members killed in action, he said in a statement on Monday. He pointed to the Pentagon's Defense Casualty Analysis System, which he said was regularly updated with the latest information regarding dead and wounded U.S. troops. The publicly available site offers aggregate figures but does not include information on specific mass casualty attacks of the sort that have occurred in Jordan over the last week. Cherry-picking raw numbers without context paints a deliberately misleading and incomplete picture, Mr. Parnell said. He later posted on social media that the vast majority of the nearly 100 casualties since July 7th involved mild concussions, and 90% of those service members have returned to duty. In the days since the collapse of a fragile truce, the Pentagon has provided little information about the American military strategy after nearly 5 months of war. The last major Pentagon briefing on the war was held in early May. In the past several months, the Trump administration has failed to disclose how the Iran war has drained U.S. supplies of critical costly weapons and how Iran retained and rebuilt substantial missile capabilities. The subject of American casualties in the war is similarly sensitive. The deaths of 2 Army soldiers in Jordan on Friday and another service member in northern Iraq, bringing to 17 the total number of American military personnel killed since the United States and Israel launched attacks on Iran on February 28th. The Pentagon's casualty reporting protocols call for publicly identifying deceased service members only after 24 hours have passed since the next of kin were notified. The names of troops wounded in action are not typically released. In a statement on Saturday, Central Command said 4 American service members wounded on Friday's attack were taken to Jordanian hospitals and had been discharged. More American troops received minor injuries and had returned to duty, the statement said, but it did not specify how many. And the statement did not mention service members injured in the 3 previous attacks in Jordan last week. In a brief phone call with News Nation, President Trump said the troops died in service of our country and reiterated the war's primary goal of never allowing Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said on social media on Saturday that the loss of the two U.S. soldiers would stiffen American resolve. According to Pentagon's casualties reporting site, 427 U.S. service members have been injured in the Iran conflict. The site counts 14 troops killed in hostile and non hostile incidents. The online death figures have not been updated to include the deaths the Pentagon announced over the weekend. Mr. Parnell said the figures for wounded troops include everything from minor sprained ankles during routine training to incidents entirely unrelated to combat operations. In previous administrations, the Pentagon usually delayed providing any details on injured service members until family notifications were completed. During the Biden administration, the Pentagon typically reported the number of service members injured in attacks by Iran backed militias on U.S. bases in Syria and Iraq. More than 1,700 Iranian civilians have died in the war, according to estimates. Trump says new Air Force One will be taken out of service to be maxed out. The Qatari donated plane has been under scrutiny over whether it is fitted with sufficient defensive capabilities to adequately protect a U.S. president and others traveling in it. This article is by Maggie Haberman. President Trump said on Sunday that the Boeing luxury jet donated by Qatar that he recently took overseas would soon be maxed out, suggesting it could get additional defensive capabilities to match the standards of older jets used for presidential travel. The president commented after returning to Washington from New Jersey aboard the jet, a Boeing 747-800 that was given as a gift and which Mr. Trump has said he plans to take with him for his presidential library when he leaves office. A reporter traveling with a small group of reporters in the presidential motorcade pointed to Qatari's jet fuselage and said, "Mr. President, this plane does not have anti-missile defense systems on it. Why are you flying on it?" Mr. Trump replied, "Well, it has a lot, and it has a lot of capability, but as I understand it, in about a month or so, they're going to send it to have it to be maxed out. So they're going to be sending it and they'll have it be maxed out. It'll take about a month," he said. It was not clear what specific upgrade Mr. Trump was referring to or whether the time frame he gave of a month until it is ready was realistic. The White House spokesman did not immediately respond to an email seeking additional clarification of what Mr. Trump was referring to by maxed out and about the time frame he mentioned. Nonetheless, it appears to be an admission from the president that plane security measures are not as extensive as models that have been designed to be built from the ground up to serve as Air Force One. The New York Times reported earlier this month that the new jet, which he flew to Turkey, lacks the same defensive countermeasures as the older model, including anti-missile capabilities. The coverage prompted a leak investigation that included a highly unusual step of the FBI just 24 hours after the story appeared, hand delivering subpoenas to Times reporters to testify before a federal grand jury. The Qatari donated jet, a roughly 14-year-old plane, went through a costly yet relatively rushed process to make it safe to serve as Air Force One, the military call sign for whatever plane the president is flying. The models that are built by Boeing for use by a U.S. president are intended to be a flying Oval Office with anti-missile defenses and a hardening of the plane's wiring to protect it from an electromagnetic pulse in case there is a nuclear strike. The planes can also refuel in midair and contain a medical suite that can treat the president. Mr. Trump flew the plane to Turkey for the NATO summit almost 2 weeks ago, but he announced he was taking one of the older jets, which he has repeatedly criticized as too dated and stiff in its appointments. When he flew out of Turkey, the Times reported that the Secret Service had advised him to take the older plane. The Times then reported that the donated aircraft, which administration officials described as a bridge plane until the long-delayed two brand new jets that the government has commissioned from Boeing arrive, is lacking some of the most sophisticated systems that the older Air Force One planes have. The White House directed the FBI director to oversee an investigation into how the Times obtained the information. That resulted in the subpoenas being served to several reporters involved in the coverage, with federal agents showing up at their homes to hand deliver them as opposed to sending the subpoenas to the newspaper's lawyers. And now, ending on a light note, men in shorts are shaking up Japan's button-down offices. The Tokyo government is allowing workers to wear shorts for the first time this summer, prompting delicate questions about etiquette and hairy legs. This article is by Javier C. Hernandez and Hisako Iuno. For more than 3 decades, Noboru Watanabe wore the uniform of the Japanese salarymen: trousers, a starched shirt, a jacket, and a necktie. But last week, Mr. Watanabe, 53, an environmental official in Tokyo, ditched the outfit for the unimaginable: a t-shirt and a pair of khaki shorts. He was taking advantage of the new policy by the Tokyo government to allow its workers to wear shorts in the office after successive summers of record-breaking heat. Everyone says I look younger, Mr. Watanabe said near his desk on a recent afternoon. I seem more approachable. I feel I am helping relax the whole office. The policy is the latest attempt by Japanese officials to persuade the country's millions of office workers to dress down in the summer to make office life more comfortable, reduce the use of air conditioning, and save energy. Under the Cool Biz initiative, the government encourages workers to forego heavy suits in favor of polo shirts, linen tops, and sneakers in hot weather. But shorts, newly allowed this summer, are a bridge too far for some. The policy has prompted debate in Japan and inspired delicate conversations at the office about etiquette and how to deal with the sight of a colleague's hairy legs. The Japanese new media has even coined a new term, sunehare, or leg hair harassment, to describe the sense of grievance some women feel when they are forced to observe their male co-workers' legs. Rui Sajiki, 23, an employee at the Tokyo government offices, acknowledged that seeing bare legs in a professional setting could be jarring for women, but she offered her blessing when Mr. Watanabe, her supervisor, asked if she minded if he wore shorts in the office. Mr. Suzuki, a public relations employee, wore a pair of athletic stretch pants to work on a recent day. He had shaved the parts of his ankles that were exposed, saying he wanted to show that he cared about hygiene and grooming. Mr. Suzuki said he did not yet dare to wear shorts because he did not want to offend his female colleagues. His wardrobe choices are guided by his wife, he said, who has advised him to maintain proper skincare and dress appropriately for his age. In Japan, people don't have a positive macho image of hairy legs, he said. I'm not so hairy, but I'm mindful. I don't want to be seen as sloppy. And that's it. You have been listening to a reading of articles and features from the July 21st issue of the front section of the New York Times. We read from the front section of the New York Times every Sunday at 1 p.m. Your reader has been Patrice. It has been my pleasure to read to you, and I wish you a wonderful day. Thanks for listening.